A story of change. A path to renewal. A leader reimagining her nation's future.
This will be my first official visit to India as the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. So looking forward to participating in the NDTV World Summit, where I will have the opportunity to engage with global leaders and thinkers.
Catch Sri Lankan Prime Minister Harini Amarasuriya at the NDTV World Summit 2025, 17th to 18th October on the NDTV network. The front lines of Kargil. The fury of Operation Sindhu.
So many attacks.
The chaos and cries of disaster zones. To fighter jet cockpits. And the world's most defining interviews.
It's incredible.
He has seen history break. Live. Unfiltered. 20,000 hours of live broadcasting.
Welcome to Left, Right and Centre.
Hard facts.
War-struck country.
Hard questions.
In the Ukraine.
30 years of trust.
In the Kargil area.
North Ukraine. In France. In Italy. At Srinagar. I am Vikrant. Vishnu Shom for NDTV.
Vishnu Shom. Only on NDTV.
What does the youth of Bihar want in this election? I will dissect and explain.
When it comes to elections, I crunch numbers and tell you what others miss.
Bihar elections, the what, why and how.
I read Bihar politics like no one else.
For over 4 decades now, I have had a ringside view of some of India's biggest elections. This time, I will bring to you the twists and turns of Bihar elections.
Understand the real election dynamics in Bihar. With me on Bihar Battleground.
The ultimate battle for Bihar. NDTV unites the biggest voices, unmissable debates and data discourse. Battleground Bihar on NDTV 24/7.
Who's driven the relationship between our countries, and it's wonderful that you could fly in for this event. Let me start by asking you, and we are talking about the Asia-Pacific region, and I promise I will ask about cricket at the end of all of this. To what extent is our strategic partnership premised by the fact that China is a mutual concern?
Well, it's not just about China, Vishnu. The relationship between Australia and India has been long and strong, a bit intermittent, but basically long and strong for the best part of 200 years. People often forget that there were Indian troops at Gallipoli, there were Indian troops at Tobruk, there were Indian troops at Singapore serving alongside the Australians. And we now have something like 1 million Australians of Indian background in our country. And so it's a strong and dynamic relationship that's growing all the time. But yes, we do have, I suppose, a shared concern about the ambitions of Communist China. And let's not beat around the bush. Under the Communist Party, Beijing, it says it often, their objective is to dominate the region and then to dominate the world. They frequently say that by the centenary of communist control, that's to say by 2049, they want to be the global hegemonic power. And that spells trouble. It spells trouble for all of China's neighbours, and in the end, it spells trouble for the wider world, because over the last couple of 100 years, we've been evolving in the direction of liberal, pluralist democracy under the long Anglo-American ascendancy. And if the dominant power changes and the dominant philosophy changes, well, then the world will change with it, and not necessarily for the better.
How do you assume that it's not going to change? China is a growing economy, militarily now the largest navy in the world, the pace of their militarization unmatched perhaps in human history. Therefore, are we not in for a fundamental change in the world order within the next finite period of time?
Well, one of the points that I've been making for years now is that India is the essential democratic counterweight to China. And India should not underestimate itself. India is now the world's most populous country. I think India is at the beginning of the kind of economic takeoff that China was in 2 decades ago. You go to any large Indian city, there is massive infrastructure going on, subway systems being put in. India is now being crisscrossed by motorways, new airports. India is rising up the ranks in all the various industries that matter, and in general economic sophistication. India can substitute for China in all of those critical supply chains that the West needs to move out of China as a matter of some urgency. So I think really the 21st century belongs to India just as much as it might belong to China. And I think it will be much better for all of us if India bulks larger and perhaps China bulks smaller in the decades to come.
Mr. Abbott, I agree with you entirely, but there is a new reality, perhaps a mini reality happening right now. We've had our Prime Minister visit Tianjin a couple of weeks back, where we saw him with the Chinese president. We're re-establishing direct flights between Beijing and Delhi, which should in any case have been there. But there is an economic reset as well, and there is a calibrated effort by India to befriend China more. Does that potentially challenge what you mentioned when you saw India as a counterweight to China?
Well, again, let me just stress this, Vishnu. As Prime Minister, I would frequently say that India was the world's emerging democratic superpower. I think India has emerged now. I think it is the second democratic superpower. And if there is to be a leader of the free world in 40 or 50 years' time, I think it's at least as likely to be the Prime Minister of India as it is the President of the United States. We should not assume that just because China's economy is much bigger than India's today, that is still going to be the case in a few decades' time. India has, I think, 3 priceless advantages over China. Democracy, which in the end brings out the best in people. The rule of law, which in the end means that people will be treated fairly. And to a great extent, the English language, which rightly or wrongly tends to be the world's common language. So I think India has got some big advantages, and I think it is now well and truly making the most of them. That said, I think that we are entering a very dangerous period. I think it's almost certain that at some point in the near future, Beijing will make a move on Taiwan. We can all see the damage and the danger that's arisen from the Ukraine war. Well, any move on Taiwan will be several orders of magnitude more disruptive and potentially dangerous than what's happening in Ukraine. How do we stop it? Well, the Chinese leadership is rational. It's a party dictatorship. It's not a personal dictatorship. It's certainly not a theocratic dictatorship. It is rational. And if Beijing thinks it's just going to be China versus Taiwan, they'll move. If they think it could be China versus a strong democratic partnership, well then they'll stay their hand. They need to keep thinking every day, not today. And the best way to persuade them that today is not the day is if they think they might lose.
And who's going to defend Taiwan? Do you expect the United States to base soldiers in large numbers? Do you expect AUKUS to be a significant military player? Do you see Australian soldiers potentially doing the same?
Well, if the Chinese are to fear that any attempt to seize Taiwan will fail, I think all those things need to be very real prospects. Now, I know the Americans have had this position of strategic ambiguity on Taiwan. I did notice that President Biden on 4 separate occasions said that America would defend Taiwan. We've had a couple of former Japanese Prime Ministers in Shinzo Abe and Taro Aso say that any attack on Taiwan would be existential for Japan, indicating that the Japanese see this as something that they could do even under their current constitution. And of course, if the Japanese were involved in a defence of Taiwan, almost certainly that would trigger America's alliance relationship with Japan, and then of course that would trigger America's alliance relationship with Australia. Now, we're talking about something that would be absolutely catastrophic. Let's be under no illusions. It would be a calamity almost unparalleled in human history, and yet we don't want a world dominated by totalitarian communism either, and we don't want to surrender the free peoples of the world, particularly China's neighbours, to domination. And this is why it's very important to appreciate that weakness is provocative, and the only way to secure the peace is through strength.
And yet China continues to do whatever it's doing. I mean, on our own Himalayan frontier, we've seen so-called salami slicing. I mean, you know, incursions into territory, whether it's Indian or Bhutanese, Bhutan being such a small country. We've seen a lot of things in eastern Ladakh as well, closer to your part of the world, in the South China Seas. We've seen them, you know, create islands out of shoals and occupy these physically. The most rapid period of naval growth, ton for ton, in military history. Do you not believe that any Western alliance or any alliance of, Australia and the United States would still end up being, and Japan would still end up being overwhelmed with the pace of Chinese military activity?
The short answer is no. I think it is possible to defend Taiwan. It is absolutely possible to defend Taiwan. I suppose the danger is escalation. Now, we did see in the Korean War a direct clash between American and Allied forces, including Indians, and Chinese forces, which did not escalate. My hope, my prayer, my devout prayer, is that it never comes to this. If it does come to this, we have to hope and pray and be as wise as serpents, as well as innocent as doves. We have to hope and pray that it doesn't escalate. But the point I make is that the best way to ensure that nothing untoward happens is not to pretend that China has peaceful intentions. It is to be prepared to let China know every day that it cannot get away with this lightly, because I stress again and again and again, weakness is provocative. If Ukraine had been in NATO, there would have been no Putin invasion of Ukraine. It was only because the Russian dictator thought that Ukraine would be a pushover that he did what he did. Now, the Ukrainians have been absolutely heroic, and I believe that effectively it's the freedom of all that the Ukrainians are fighting for. So I wish that the democracies of the world had done more for them, but thank God, thus far at least, they have resisted mightily. And if President Trump does provide them with those Tomahawk missiles, I suspect they may be able to make the cost of continuing the war so high that Putin might decide that it just isn't worth it.
It's interesting that you brought up Europe. I was coming to that. There's a fundamental realignment between the United States and Europe. I was at the Munich Security Conference. I heard J.D. Vance speak, where he essentially said that Europe had to be in charge of its own security, essentially throwing the premise of NATO under the carpet. How do you see these changed relations between Europe and the United States, which has been their security blanket?
Well, you're right, Vishnu. Many countries, including my own, have basically been free riding on the United States. And with the partial exception of Britain, this has been particularly true of the countries of Europe. Europe, even just the EU, has a larger population than the United States. It has, I think, a slightly larger GDP than the United States. So if it wanted to, it would be more than capable of fending for itself. And Donald Trump and JD Vance, and indeed earlier US presidents, have quite rightly told the Europeans that they need to lift their game. It's just that Trump has done it in a much more, shall we say, insistent and somewhat overbearing way. But it has had the desired effect. As we heard the German ambassador say earlier this morning, Germany is significantly and dramatically rearming. But old habits die hard. It's hard to shake complacency. When people get into a kind of torpor, it doesn't shift lightly. And the difficulty that the West has, not just, I mean, this is general in the West at the moment. There's a degree of economic stagnation, a degree of social fragmentation, rising strategic peril, and, if I may say, an element of spiritual malaise. We do not believe in ourselves as much today as we once did. And in the end, if you are to defend yourself and indeed assert yourself, there's got to be a high level of self-belief.
Just linking to your comments on the situation in Europe and to Russia, Ukraine, India has a fiercely autonomous foreign policy. We continue to import Russian oil. We believe that this is in our self-interest. We have a huge country, a huge set of energy needs. America has a problem with that. Trump has repeatedly voiced his concern, and yet India believes we need to do what is in our self-interest. How would you look at this?
Well, Vishnu, I absolutely understand that for a country like India, the biggest day-to-day challenge is how do we continue to lift people out of poverty and into the middle class. And India has been doing increasingly well at this, but there is still a long way to go. I mean, every village has to have electrification. Every home has to have sanitation. People need to come into the formal and not just be in the informal economy. So I absolutely understand why India feels that it's got to continue to develop. And let me just, on that point, say, please, don't fall for any of this nonsense about a green transition. You need affordable, reliable power. And if that means fossil fuels, including coal from Australia, please keep using fossil fuels. A friend of mine was in an Indian village recently, and it was a village that was apparently where the green transition was being tried, and the villagers, she said, were saying, we want real power, not fake power that only operates when the wind blows and the sun shines.
But Mr. Abbott...
And so India needs to look to what is going to best guarantee its long-term future. But India's natural place is with its fellow democracies. That's its natural place. India has well and truly assimilated democracy, the rule of law, because let's face it, human beings, if given the chance, want to be free. Our natural instinct, if given the chance, is to be decent. And that's where India naturally, I believe, should rest.
There is a double standard, though, in what our fellow democracies are doing. In as much as we are being lectured about continuing the import of Russian oil, which you deflected, you didn't quite answer my question. There are those...
I'm a politician, of course I deflect.
But I'll push you to this. Europe continues to meet some of its energy imports from Russia. America, it continues to import extremely sensitive, nuclear-related material from the United States. And why is India being told to stop?
Well, I think
Why should we be bullied into that?
I think that's a very fair point you make, Vishnu. And while in the broad, I'm a supporter of President Trump, I think he misplayed his hand, if you like, recently when he whacked those punitive tariffs on India, particularly given that there are other countries that are cheating here, particularly China, that didn't get the same kind of treatment. I mean, one of the big mistakes that America made in the Cold War period was consistently tilting towards Pakistan, a military dictatorship, as opposed to India, a liberal democracy. For the last 20 years, the Americans very sensibly have been trying to rectify that. I think this is a serious setback, but given the fundamental community of interests and values that India does have with the democracies, I think it'll only be a temporary setback, but let's hope that this can be remedied very quickly.
But even with Pakistan, India really worked to build up a relationship with the United States. We have an incredibly important and deep strategic partnership which both countries value. But the rhetoric that we've been seeing coming out of Washington in the last couple of months, and the linking of India and Pakistan in statements when we always wanted these to be de-linked. You know, you look at Pakistan as a separate entity, look at us as a separate entity, don't combine the two together. But then every other statement of Donald Trump seems to be having both India and Pakistan in it. So how are we to feel different or special or valued as deep strategic partners?
As I said, I think that the President has struck some false notes, if I may say so. Now, no one's perfect, not even Donald Trump. So don't tell him I said that.
I'll try not to. But we'll switch off the feed to the White House right now.
But as I said, I think always go back to the basics. And America's fundamental interests lie in a strong friendship with India, much more than they do in a strong friendship with Pakistan. India's fundamental interests lie in a strong partnership with its fellow democracies, much less than with the dictatorships, much less than with the country that's nibbling away at its northern borders. So I think the fundamentals will reassert themselves. I just think it's most unfortunate that something impulsive and a bit inexplicable has suddenly happened. I mean, I honestly don't know why America, after 2 decades of tilting towards India, would suddenly and apparently quite capriciously have reversed that.
The big problem that so many countries across the world face, and certainly over here, is the threat of terrorism. We are very clear about that. Terrorism emerges from Pakistan. The evidence of this is huge, and yet when a large country like the United States has some of their top generals saying that, Pakistan works with us extremely closely on terrorism and we value that greatly, again, there appears to be a double standard. Let's not forget about the basis, the heart of where terrorism has come from, whether it's 9/11 or 26/11.
Yep, and look, Pakistan cooperated so closely with the United States on terrorism that they gave Osama bin Laden a home for the best part of a decade. So, look, we can't be under any illusions. There are good people in Pakistan, and there are people in Pakistan who you'd want to work with collegially, but it is still at heart a military society with a strong Islamist streak. India is totally different, and I'm not saying that America should not work where it can with Pakistan. Of course it should, but it needs to know where its better friends are. I mean, when I was Prime Minister, I thought that I would do my best to work constructively with everyone, but you've always got to know where your friends are, and your friends are the ones where there's common interests, common values, and in particular a common history. And that's you've always got to realise that.
Mr. Abbott, Australia is a destination for so many Indian students now. There are many who've gone on to become excellent Australian citizens. But in as much as that may be the case, we've seen attacks on Indians in your country as well, machete attacks, other attacks, murders, etc., etc. The police have been investigating that. Is there a concern that you share or that you have on people from India or the subcontinent being targeted by Australians who feel that a part of Australia's culture may be going away? Is that a worry for people?
There are two issues here, Vishnu. Issue number one is immigration to Australia generally too high? And we've had absolute all-time record numbers over the last 3 years. Immigration to Australia has been running at roughly 500,000 a year, and that's double what it was before the pandemic, and it's about 4 times what it was under John Howard back 20 years ago. So immigration to Australia is too high, and it does need to be scaled back. But certainly our immigration policy will and must remain a non-discriminatory one. So that's one issue. The other issue is crime. Now, trust me, Melbourne has a crime problem. It's not crime that singles out any particular group of people. There's just a crime problem in Melbourne. There are these youth gangs that are out of control. The Victorian police have been, I think, weakened and demoralised by too much politically correct woke ideology. It's about time that the police once more took control of the streets, and that will make the streets of Melbourne and other cities in Australia safer for everyone, including Australians of Indian background.
You've had the opportunity of engaging Prime Minister Modi on quite a few occasions. Could you tell us a little bit about that exchange and how that's really built up this relationship? And I ask this because when I started as a journalist 30 odd years back, I remember a situation when there was a great deal of concern that Australia and India weren't really allies. There were sonar buoys which were dropped by your reconnaissance aircraft near Indian destroyers, which were then promptly picked up by the Indian Navy, but that's a separate story, to this relationship which has gone a fair way under Modi. So could you tell us about that?
Well, I think what you're talking about, Vishnu, is sort of the Cold War hangover. I think that at least over the last 24 years, we've put that well and truly behind us. We now participate in the annual Malabar naval exercises. India, as I understand it, is now participating in our biannual Talisman Sabre exercise, one of the largest military exercises in the world that takes place in northern Australia. It was wonderful to see the...
Pitch Black, right?
Yeah, Talisman Sabre is the land exercise, Pitch Black is the air exercise. It was wonderful to see the very sophisticated exercises going on recently between the British Carrier Strike Group and the Indian Aircraft Carrier Force. So I think things are really, really picking up. But yeah, there was a period there. As I said, it was the unfortunate accompaniment of America's Cold War tilt to Pakistan, but excluding the tensions of the last couple of months, which I think is sort of like a passing sun shower, just a passing sun shower, not climate change, it's not climate change, it's just a bad weather event, that's all it is.
Before we wrap this up, I have to ask you about cricket, where we started off from. I'm absolutely certain India is going to trounce you guys.
Well, you didn't. I mean, we won 3-1 in the Test series.
Fluke.
And I think that the same thing can be expected in the one-day series. But I think what we can also be sure is that a magnificent spectacle will be provided and that everyone who attends will be mesmerised by skill and sportsmanship.
Is cricket our biggest bond?
it's something important that we have in common. And I guess sport is a wonderful way of building character in individuals. It's a wonderful way of building friendship. I think team sport is a particularly important part of the formation of fine human beings. Certainly, team sport was a very important part of my early life, my young adulthood. I think it's wonderful that team sport, whether it be cricket or soccer, is really flourishing here in India. I think our schools would all be much better if sport was compulsory for everyone. I think too often these days teachers think, oh, it's all too hard to stay back after class and coach sporting teams. This is a very important part of a successful growing up.
Okay. I have a 30-second quick-fire round with you, putting you on the spot. This didn't feature in the list of themes which I sent across to you, so I was being a bit unfair then. Kohli or Steve Smith? Kohli or Steve Smith, who's better?
They're both superstars.
Jasprit Bumrah or Pat Cummins? Don't be a politician now.
I think Pat Cummins is probably one of the greatest bowlers.
Sachin Tendulkar or Ricky Ponting?
Tendulkar was a genius.
All right. And my very final question to you, surfing at Manly Beach.
Yes.
It's been a real joy for you, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I used to take my board out at about 6:30 in the morning, probably a couple of mornings a week when I was the member for the local area. And when my office would say, "What the hell have you been doing this morning?" I would say, "I've been dropping in on my constituents."
It's been wonderful speaking to you, Mr. Abbott, and welcome back to India. And I think it's just wonderful that we have this super relationship. And, despite any questions which I may have asked, I do believe it is democracy which lies as the bedrock of this.
And could I just finish on this note? Sometimes the Western liberal or leftist press is critical of India under Modi. He's seen as a sort of a subcontinental Trump, and that's a criticism. I keep saying anyone who knows India appreciates it's got a riotously free media, it's got a robustly independent judiciary, and it has completely free and fair elections, and that's democracy.
Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. I'd now like to invite Kartikeya Haryani, the founder and CEO of Charge Zone, to honor Tony Abbott, the former Prime Minister of Australia. If you can just come up onto the stage.
We are shifting focus away from NDTV World Summit onto some news that's coming in right now. Major cabinet reshuffle in Gujarat, where 26 ministers have taken oath, and that includes Harsh Sanghvi, who is the Home Minister, who's now been sworn in as the Deputy Chief Minister. Latest updates that are coming in, those are visuals on your screens of